Hello, students. Today, we're going to be looking at the peer review assignment. This video is meant as an auditory introduction to peer review to give you a few tips and a few tricks and to help you get a little bit better grounded in what you need to do. So let's start with what I mean when I say peer review. To put it most simply, your review will be of another student's work. That other student is your peer. A peer is someone who is in the same class as you, usually doing the assignments as you. Once you've given your work to a peer, you review it, giving each other advice and suggestions, asking questions, and finding ways to improve the work. When students are first asked to do a peer review, sometimes they find it intimidating. They don't want to share with a peer or are nervous about what other people have to say. However, once they get used to it and practice it, most students find it really nice to have feedback and to be able to get help and offer help too. One thing to remember is that even when a work is good, nobody likes their peer feedback to just say, "It's great, I liked it a lot." Why? Because that doesn't help. So, tip number one is to give suggestions and helpful feedback. Another thing to note is that many students start out not enjoying peer review. Sometimes it's because they're nervous, sometimes because they share a lot and their peer doesn't share a lot back. So, why do we still do peer review in classes? Because they work. Once you get used to it, and once you do feel more comfortable, and that you know that you have confidence, peer reviews actually work. Well, what about those papers that don't have a lot of feedback? Well, here's something you may not know. A recent study was done with a group of students. In one group, they were taught how to give good feedback. In the other group, they were taught how to receive and use feedback. Whose writing do you think improved more? Well, you might be surprised. It was the students who learned how to give feedback, the students who learned how to look critically at writing. You may not get the best feedback on your paper, but you're learning how to give feedback. And that is what's going to make you a better writer, even if sometimes the feedback you get is sometimes disappointing. So, tip number two is give the best feedback you can because it will help you to improve your own writing. The more practice you get at looking at writing, whether it's your own or other people's, the better your writing is going to turn out. And a lot of times you're going to find that other people have done things in their papers that you're going to try on your own. In fact, that leads me directly to number three, which might surprise you. While you're doing your peer reviews, take notes. If you see someone making a move that interests you or approaching an idea in a way that you like or using a technique that you find successful, write it down, save it, and use it in your own papers. Having other students look at your paper can be helpful, especially for ideas that are specific to the assignments that you share. But sometimes you want someone trained to look at your paper. Well, that leads us to tip number four, using the Writing Center. We have an online writing center as well as tutors and the Brain Fuse program. Use them as much as you want. They aren't grammar checkers. If you want a grammar checker, you can do grammarly.com or my preference, paperrater.com. But the Writing Center and tutors and Brain Fuse will look at the directions and the work you've done and help to guide you in ensuring that you've done the assignment to the best of your ability. So, tip number four, use the Writing Center. Sometimes being anxious that you don't want to insult or hurt someone's feelings, well, that can make it hard to give feedback. So this leads me right into tip number 5. If you aren't sure how to give advice, try asking questions. No judgment, no criticism, just ask questions. Where did you not understand something? This will allow you to read like a reader, not a teacher. You don't have to be an authority to ask questions. You could say something like, "Hey, does this really belong here for me as a reader?" You're the audience member, so you know what you don't understand. And you know where you want more information, and you have a probably a pretty good instinct for where they will fit and benefit from more evidence, examples, and sources. That's it, asking questions. The more questions, the better, because it gives ownership to the writer. So you're saying, instead of saying something like, you need to fix this and this is how, instead you're saying something like, hey, I'm not sure if I understood this part. This is what I think it means. Is that what it means? And that leaves the writer the opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to make a note of that and I'm going to go back and I'm going to fix it because that's not what it was supposed to mean. That's number 5, asking questions. Tip number 6, peer editing is a conversation. That's why it's in the discussion board. If a reviewer suggests that you need to make some changes or need to add a few more sources, you as the writer can ask where, what kind of sources, what kind of change, why are you thinking that? Don't let them off the hook. Ask for clarification. It should be a two-way conversation. Now keep in mind, the person whose paper you are reviewing may not be the person responsible for your paper. So it's up to you to hold the conversation by using the discussion board. Tip number 7 is about knowing that someone else is reading your paper. Now, this is about what you can do. Did you know you can leave them notes? Nobody is stopping you. If you have a concern or a question as the writer of a paper, maybe you have a section you're not quite done with yet and you want to leave a note for your reader, do it. If you have a question, ask your peer reviewer. They might be able to answer the question in a way that you like, or that it might help you to finish the paper. As I said in tip number 6, this is a conversation, but be specific. Make sure you answer them with specificity. Like if you want to say, okay, on page number 2 in the second paragraph, it says this, blah, 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 blah. Be specific with the page number, the paragraph, even down to the sentence that you're talking about. Because the author won't know exactly what you're talking about unless you're specific. Tip number 8 is also about understanding that someone else is reading your paper. In this case, it is to start and end with praise. Always sandwich advice or even questions by saying something that you like. Say something you like before you say something you don't like. If you're going to make a critical statement, be sure to say something nice first. As a reviewer, you want to be specific, but you also want to put it on yourself to make it easier to take. So instead of saying you weren't clear enough, you might say, I was a little confused on what this means. Could you explain it to me? And as a writer, if your reviewer says something like, well, I was a little confused, could you explain it? You should be asking yourself, why did the reader not understand what I was trying to do? So this is tip number 9, avoid direct attack. And if someone does write something that feels hard to take, don't take it personal. This leads to number 10. Tip number 10, my favorite piece of advice over the years, and I've given this advice many times, and I hope you will take it to heart. When people give you advice, you say thank you, and then you take what you want out of it. So you have 2 peer reviewers. Sometimes when you have two peer reviewers, they will say the opposite things. Well, you decide which one you want to listen to, and that's the one you listen to. That is my tip number 10. You take the advice that you want to take. Now, the only time that this doesn't work well is if your teacher is giving you advice, because that one is worth a grade. So if you come to me for advice, I will give you advice, but my expectation is that you will follow that advice, because as a teacher, unlike your peers, I am professionally trained, and I do expect you to take my advice, at least on the papers in my class. So finally, and this is not a tip, this is just a last note. If you find that certain people in the class are really good, giving you really good advice, and you're really liking the advice, and you want to work with them on future papers, let me know. While the first papers are set to be randomly assigned for peer review, future papers can be assigned directly if you have a preferred peer reviewer. Keep in mind, all students will have two reviewers assigned and be given two papers to review. Not participating hurts both your own grade and the person whose paper you didn't review. It won't impact their grade, but it isn't nice to be the person whose paper wasn't reviewed. So keeping that in mind, maybe you find one person that you really liked their advice. Well, if you really liked their advice, I can always hook you up for the next peer review with that person, but you'll still get another person whose paper you have to peer review. All right, those are my tips, and I hope they help you out with your essays and your peer review. Good luck.